Now, I'd like to finish up the devotion series that I've been doing this week, Reflections Along the Emmaus Road. Reflections Along the Emmaus Road. And so over the last few days, we began by talking about the disciples who were traveling from Jerusalem to Emmaus along the Emmaus Road, how they were experiencing this cognitive slowdown, probably because of sadness and grief. They had a sense of hopelessness about them, but also confusion over what had happened and what was going on. They were disoriented. They were disoriented about it. And so as they're walking along and they're discussing and debating these things, who joins them? Jesus. Jesus joins with them. And he asks them some questions and kind of is listening to them. And they don't recognize him. They don't recognize him. Jesus has joined them and is walking along with them, talking with them, but they don't recognize Jesus. And so Jesus was with them even when they didn't recognize him. But Jesus is moving them to a point of recognizing him. And we talked about yesterday how he did that with the scriptures. How he began with a rebuke in verse 25, and then he proceeded to teach them the scriptures, Moses and all the prophets, and how they all spoke about him. And so Jesus gives them this Bible study as they're walking along. And then a little bit later, they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to them?" And so their hearts burned within them because of the scriptures, because of Jesus speaking the scriptures and showing how the Old Testament revealed him, revealed the Christ, the Messiah. And so today I want to end this reflections. And in doing so, I want to read a few verses from beginning with verse 30. So they've been walking along. The day is spent. The disciples urge Jesus to join them and not continue down the road. And so Jesus, he goes in, he stays with them. And beginning in verse 30, it says, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were open, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. Skipping to verse 33, and it says, and they arose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11, and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon. Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. Now, for us as Christians, two things are really important to us in our worship and in our lives. One is the scriptures, and the other is the sacraments. The scriptures and the sacraments. And we talked about yesterday how Christ revealed himself to them through the scriptures in verses 25 through 29 and verse 32. Today I want to talk about how Christ revealed himself to them in the meal that they had in verses 30, 31, and verse 35. You see, it is an interesting one, because here it says when he was at the table, and what he does here is it's a Eucharistic formula. It's a Eucharistic formula. He took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it. And that's a formula that we see in the institution of the Lord's Supper, at the Last Supper. And it's also words that we see in some of the miracles that Jesus did that also were foreshadowing what was to come in the Lord's Supper, in Holy Communion. And so here we have this formula. And it seems that Jesus, through the taking, the blessing, the breaking, and the giving, that's when they recognized Jesus. That's when they said, this is Jesus, this is the Christ. And so it made a huge impact on them, and their eyes were open and they recognized him. Now, an interesting point here. In the first meal, if we look back to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve in the garden, they had been commanded by God not to eat of a specific tree. So Satan comes, and with Satan coming, he entices, he deceives. And so Eve takes the fruit and has some, and she gives it to her husband. And through that meal, disobedience occurred. Sin entered the world. We call it the fall because humanity fell in that moment, in that decision, as instead of trusting God's word and believing it, they disobeyed God's word and sinned against him. Now, think of Jesus as the new Adam, which is a way in which he's referred to by the Apostle Paul, the new Adam. This new Adam in this second meal, whereas the first meal brought disobedience, the second meal, the Lord's Supper, was a meal of obedience. Jesus Christ fully obeyed his Father. He gave his body and his blood upon the cross. And by giving it upon the cross, he paid the price for our sin that we may have redemption. We may have salvation and forgiveness of sin. And so here, instead of disobedience in the Lord's Supper, we have obedience. Instead of sin, we have salvation. Instead of condemnation, we have redemption. So in this second meal, and this meal opened their eyes. Through the sacrament, they recognized Jesus. The scriptures and the sacraments are so important to our spiritual life. We go to Sunday worship, the divine service, and as we go to the divine service, we receive from God. We receive from God. We receive through the proclamation of the scriptures. We receive through the practice of Holy Communion, the sacrament. We receive what? We receive Jesus Christ. We receive Jesus Christ on a regular basis. Jesus is revealed to us through the scriptures and the sacraments. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful part of our faith to receive Jesus on a regular basis. And I know right now during this time we're not able to receive Holy Communion like we normally would. But as we do receive it, we can be thankful that we're receiving Jesus in the sacrament, his body and his blood. And these disciples, they were so excited when they recognized Jesus, when their eyes were open, that they arose that same hour. And remember, we know from earlier the day was far spent. But listen, they had just encountered the resurrected Christ. And encountering the resurrected Christ, they're so excited over the Bible study that he gave them. They're so excited over the supper, the Lord's Supper that they celebrate, the sacrament, that they run back to Jerusalem to share it with the apostles. And so it's it's a wonderful story. It's encouraging, and hopefully for each of us, we too experience Christ through the proclamation of the scriptures and through the practice of the sacrament of Holy Communion. And I believe that's I'm just scratching the surface in terms of reflections for this passage, the Emmaus Road passage. But I hope that you're encouraged in hearing, receiving the proclamation of the scriptures and the sacrament, and receiving Jesus Christ, recognizing him.